Hello, welcome to a short snippet of a A-level biology lesson on exchange surfaces. So today we're, like I said, looking at exchange surfaces, and before we start I wanted to ask a question, which is, why is gas exchange so important anyway in organisms? Why is this idea of us being able to efficiently exchange gases from an organism to its outside, why is this so important? Yeah, so number one, as organisms, we need oxygen and nutrients to come inside our bodies so that we can use them for respiration. And then we also need to get rid of CO2 and waste. So this exchange of oxygen and nutrients inside and this removal of CO2. And it's really important to remove the CO2 because when CO2 builds up into high concentrations, we get toxic effects, and that can have detrimental effects to our cells and our tissues. So we need to get rid of that CO2, and we need to also take in oxygen as well for respiration. Good. So the next question I wanted to ask is, what affects the rate of exchange of substances within an organism? So you may have seen this already at GCSE level, or you might remember it. But the first really important thing that affects the rate of exchange of gases within an organism is the organism's surface area to volume ratio. And you probably heard of this phrase before. And a lot of the time when we're looking at organisms in biology, we like to represent them as spheres. And this is because a sphere is a 3D object and we are 3D. And also because it's got quite a rounded shape, and as organisms we don't have like these rigid shapes. We're more rounded in the way that we're formed or designed. So yeah, we like to use spheres, and because of this we need to be able to work out the surface area and the volume of a sphere. And you might remember this from GCSE maths. So just in case you haven't or you don't remember, I've put it here on the side. So surface area is 4 pi r squared and volume is 4/3 pi r cubed. Good. So, but if we're looking here at our table here, what we see is that we've got different units of measurement. For bacteria, we've got these micrometers, which are these really small units of measurement that we use for really small organisms that are not usually we're not usually able to see with the naked eye alone. And then for our dog and our whale, we've got meters. But when we're looking at surface area to volume ratio, we want to make sure all of our units are the same so that we can actually compare these organisms. So what we need to do is actually be able to convert micrometers and millimeters into meters. And usually micrometers aren't a thing that we're usually used to using. So I wanted to go through how we would convert micrometers into meters. So if we were to see this this text that I've put here, if I've told you that 1,000 micrometers are in 1 millimeter, and we know that 1,000 millimeters are in a meter, so therefore there's 1,000,000 micrometers in 1 meter. And the way I've done that is I've times 1,000, see 1,000 micrometers are in 1 millimeter, by the 1,000 millimeters that are in 1 meter. So what we get essentially is that there's 1,000,000 micrometers in 1 meter. And so that's significant because when we're working out the surface area or the volume of the sphere, we are going to need to convert our radius. And let's go through these steps in order for us to work out the final surface area to volume ratio of this bacterium. So the first step is to convert the radius to meters. And to do that, we need to divide our radius, which is 0.5 micrometers. As you can see here, the radius is half of the diameter. And so what we do is we divide 0.5 by 1,000,000. And that will give us our meters. I'll represent 1,000,000 as 1 times 10 to the power of 6, because that's essentially the same thing, because 1,000,000 has 1 and 6 zeros after it. And that's what this 6 times 10 to the power minus 10 to the power of 6 means. And here we should get 5 times 10 to the power of minus 7. And this minus 7 is good because we know that this is a really, really small number, and we need to have a really, really small value. Okay, good. So for step 2, to find out the surface area, we need to substitute our value for r. So we worked out r in terms of meters, and we need to substitute this into this equation. So essentially we're doing 4 times pi sorry, my writing isn't very good, times the radius, which is 5 times 10 to the power of minus 7. I'll put this in brackets just so that we don't get confused. So times 10 to the power of minus 7. And then we need to square that. So I'd suggest that you square that using the laws of BIDMAS. I'd suggest that you square our radius first and then times the 4 pi. And we should get this value here, which is 3.1 times 10 to the power of minus 12. Again, a really small number, which is what we want to see. And then thirdly, we'll work out the volume. So it's quite a similar process to working out the surface area. We're again substituting the radius that we've worked out in the first step into this equation. But this time we're cubing it. So this time it's going to be a bracket and then 5 times 10 to the power of minus 7 and cubed. So cubed is timesing it by itself 3 times. And then we'll times it by this 4 over 3 pi r cubed. But for time purposes, we can see here what the answer would be, which is 5.2 times 10 to the power of minus 19. Good. And then when we're working out our surface area to volume ratio, we want to work it out in the simplest form. And the reason why we work it out in the simplest form is in order for us to be able to compare these surface areas. So what we'd have is 3.1 times 10 to the power of 12 times 10 to the power of minus 12, and then we'll have the ratio symbol, and then we'll have 5 times 5.2 times 10 to the power of minus 19. Good. And to work out it in the simplest form, what we'd essentially do is we want the volume as 1. So to get the volume as 1, we need to divide the volume by itself, because whenever you divide something by itself, it always equals 1. So you divide the volume by itself, and then whatever you do to the right hand side, you must do to the left hand side. So you divide this number by 5.2 times 10 to the power of minus 19, and we should get this value here. Good. And at this point, I would ask the student to use these steps that I've taught them to work out the surface area to volume ratio of this organism. And then we'll go through their answers, and they'll talk with me step by step, and I'll make sure that they've understood, and that we'll be able to consolidate their knowledge. Good. So as we can see, as we're going down and getting bigger in terms of an organism, we find that our surface area is actually decreasing. So as the organism gets bigger, the surface area decreases. So let's look at it in terms of our whale. So for the whale, this surface area is not large enough to supply its cells with sufficient oxygen. So as you can see, this really, really small surface area to volume ratio is just not enough to provide the organism with sufficient oxygen. Remember, the whale is a really huge multicellular organism. And this is, so like I said, this is because it has a small surface area to volume ratio. So in comparison to its volume, its surface area is really small. And this means that the gases must travel further distance in order to reach the innermost cells of the whale. And that means that simple diffusion is just not sufficient. And this is why we say these kind of organisms need transport systems. So they need specialized systems. And these specialized systems we'll go into later in other lessons. But for now, we need to just know that simple diffusion is just not enough. And then if we look at the bacteria, we can see that its surface area is actually 6 million times greater than the volume. That's enormous. So the surface area is more than enough to supply this single cellular bacterium with sufficient amount of oxygen. So this is because it has a large surface area to volume ratio, and there's a very short diffusion distance between the inside of the bacterium cell. Remember that a bacterium cell is a single cellular organism, so it only has to think about a one cell in terms of what needs the oxygen and what needs the nutrients. So simple diffusion is sufficient for gas exchange in this particular situation. Good. So there's actually one more thing that affects the rate of exchange of substances within an organism. So we've looked at surface area to volume ratio, but also another thing is metabolic activity. So how metabolically active an organism is. And I have this little text here that summarizes this. So essentially when we have metabolically active cells, they really have a great need for energy and food and nutrients and oxygen for aerobic respiration. So when we have very active cells, the demand for oxygen and energy is really quick, and we also need to be able to remove our CO2 really quickly as well. And specifically in organisms like mammals, where we're endotherms and we need to be able to keep our inner body or internal body temperature at a constant temperature. This adds again to the energy and oxygen demands, because we need to be able to maintain this temperature and keep warm. Good. So let's look at this exam question, and I want you to attempt this independently. But before we do, I'll go through the question with you, and we'll pick out what is important, what the important language is. So first of all, the first word or the second word is 3. So we know we need 3 points, 3 clear points in order for us to get our full marks. And then again, large multicellular. We've spoken about multicellular in terms of the whale. So we're really looking at the information that we've learned about multicellular organisms. And then mammals also a really good word that we need to look out for, because we need to think about mammals in terms of maintaining internal body temperature. And then transport system, we haven't gone too much into detail of transport systems, but I've mentioned that because our surface area, or the organism, a large multicellular organism's surface area is too small, is not sufficient enough to allow for simple diffusion. So there's a need for this transport system. So at this point I would ask the student to attempt the question, and then after we would go through the mark scheme and see, what points they got and what parts they didn't, and then make sure that their knowledge is being consolidated. Thank you for watching. I know it's gone a little bit over time, but there's a lot of information to know with A-level biology. So I've tried to go as quickly as possible, but hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.